Somewhere over the North Pacific, a machine is running out of time. Not dramatically, not with fire or spectacle, just quietly. A line, narrow as a finger, somewhere inside the engine. Oil draining. The pilot does not know it yet. He is focused, disciplined. 19 years old, trained by the most rigorous naval aviation program in the world. His hands are steady. His eyes scan the horizon with the patience of someone who has done this 100 times. Below him, the Aleutian Islands stretch like broken teeth across the gray sea. Cold, desolate. A chain of volcanic rock that nobody wanted, until both sides decided they needed it. On the other side of that same ocean, in rooms filled with charts and cigarette smoke, American analysts are trying to solve a puzzle. The puzzle has a shape, long tapered wings, an open cockpit, a radial engine that screams at full throttle. The puzzle is fast and agile, and it has been embarrassing them for 6 months. They call it the Zero, and no one has ever held one in their hands. Two forces moving toward the same cold island for completely different reasons. One is flying a mission, the other is hunting a ghost. Neither one knows what June of 1942 is about to hand them. One will leave, one will not, and the one that leaves will change everything. By the spring of 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy's Mitsubishi A6M-0 was not just a weapon, it was a myth. Since the attack on Pearl Harbor, since the campaigns over China and the skies of the Pacific, the Zero had built a reputation that bordered on supernatural. American pilots returning from engagements described it in terms that sounded almost embarrassed. Faster in a climb, tighter in a turn, able to reverse direction before you had time to process what happened. The Zero could fly nearly 2,000 miles on a single fuel load, with an external drop tank pushing that range further. Its maximum speed approached 332 miles per hour. It carried two 20mm cannons and two 7.7mm machine guns. And it weighed approximately 5,300 pounds fully loaded, because its designers had stripped it to the bone. That was the secret nobody knew yet. On the American side, the Grumman F-4F Wildcat was doing what it could. Heavier, slower in a climb, less maneuverable. Pilots were surviving on discipline and luck. The tactical doctrine they had inherited was useless against a plane this nimble. What the Americans needed was not better instincts. They needed data. They needed to crack the Zero open like a technical manual, read every wire and rivet, find the flaws buried inside its brilliance. In June of 1942, the Japanese launched Operation AL, an invasion of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. It was a diversionary campaign designed to stretch American attention thin. It worked. And in the chaos of that operation, over a small, freezing, forgettable island called Akutan, the answer fell out of the sky. Tadayoshi Koga was born on September the 10th, 1922. He was young. That word barely covers it. 19 years old and already a fully qualified naval aviator in the Imperial Japanese Navy, which meant he had survived one of the most punishing selection processes in military aviation history. The washout rate was brutal. The training was designed to break people. Koga had not broken. He had earned his place in the cockpit of an A6M-2 Model 21, the production variant of the Zero that was operating across the Pacific in the early years of the war. It was, by every available measure, a masterpiece of aeronautical engineering. The design philosophy behind the Zero was radical. Where Western aircraft designers accepted weight as a necessary cost, the Japanese team led by Jiro Horikoshi refused the compromise. Every gram was a negotiation. The Zero had no pilot armor. None. The seat behind Koga was bare metal and nothing else. The fuel tanks were not self-sealing, which meant a puncture would bleed fuel freely. There were no hydraulic boost systems to assist the control surfaces at high speed. These were not oversights, they were choices. The result was an aircraft that weighed approximately 5,300 pounds fully loaded. Light, lethally light. That reduced mass translated directly into the Zero's legendary agility. It could turn inside almost anything the Americans put in the air. It could climb faster, sustain a turn longer, and react in ways that felt physically impossible to the pilots chasing it. Its engine was the Nakajima NK-1C Sakai 12, a 14-cylinder, air-cooled radial producing approximately 940 horsepower. Reliable, efficient, the backbone of Japanese naval aviation in the early war. Koga had trained in this machine until it felt like a second skin. On June 4, 1942, he launched from the light carrier Ryujo as part of the Aleutian campaign. The target was Dutch Harbor on the island of Unalaska. It was a calculated strike, part of a strategic design to draw American forces north while the main Japanese fleet moved on Midway. History would record with some irony that the Midway operation collapsed spectacularly. But on that particular morning, over that particular piece of gray Alaskan sky, Koga was not thinking about Midway. He was thinking about the mission. The strike on Dutch Harbor encountered anti-aircraft fire and American resistance. The engagement was sharp and violent. During a strafing run, a single round from small arms fire found Koga's aircraft and severed the oil return line feeding his engine. The engine did not stop immediately. Engines rarely do. But oil began to drain, and without it, the engine would seize. Koga was flying a machine that was now on borrowed time. His section leader, Chief Petty Officer Makoto Endo, directed him toward Akutan Island, roughly 25 miles to the east. The Japanese had pre-designated Akutan as an emergency recovery point. A submarine was stationed nearby to retrieve downed pilots. The logic was sound. Koga turned east. He descended toward the island, scanning the terrain below. There was a flat area near the center, covered in what appeared to be grass, green, firm. It looked like it could hold an aircraft. He lowered his gear. A wheels-down emergency landing in a Zero was risky, but not impossible. If the ground held, the plane might be recoverable. The submarine could extract him. The aircraft might even be repaired. He came in low, controlled, professional to the last. The wheels touched the surface, and then Akutan showed him what it actually was. Not firm ground, not grass over solid earth, a bog. A waterlogged, soft, deceptive marsh that grabbed the landing gear the instant it made contact and stopped the aircraft in a fraction of a second. The Zero pitched forward violently. The nose drove into the mud, the tail came up, the aircraft inverted. Koga was thrown against his harness with a force that was immediate and absolute. He did not survive the landing. The Zero came to rest upside down in the mud, its tail in the air, its canopy buried. The engine ticked as it cooled. The oil that remained in the system seeped into the ground, and then silence. The island did not care. The fog rolled in. The cold stayed where it had always been. The grass moved in the wind as it always had. For 36 days, nothing found that plane except the weather. On the American side, the frustration was structural. It was not that pilots lacked courage or that the aircraft were poorly built. The Wildcat was a real machine, a serious machine, tough, reliable, with self-sealing fuel tanks and pilot armor that had saved lives. The problem was knowledge, specifically the absence of it. Intelligence reports on the Zero were thin and contradictory. Some came from the Chinese Air Force, which had encountered it over the mainland in 1940 and reported something extraordinary. Others came from combat debriefs, where shaken American pilots tried to describe what they had seen in terms that sounded more like hallucination than aeronautics. The Navy's technical analysts knew the basics: radial engine, single seat, long range, exceptional maneuverability. They suspected it was lightly built. But suspicion is not data, and data is what engineering runs on. The official response to the Zero problem was tactical adaptation. Commander John Thatch, a naval aviator of exceptional intelligence, developed what became known as the Thatch Weave. Two fighters working in coordinated pairs, each covering the other's tail. If a Zero locked onto one aircraft, that pilot turned toward his wingman, crossing flight paths, forcing the pursuer into the gun sights of the second plane. It worked. It was elegant, but it was a workaround, not a solution. The deeper solution required understanding exactly what the Zero could and could not do. July the 10th, 1942. The PBY Catalina had been in the air for hours. Standard patrol, cold, gray, unremarkable. The Aleutian Islands from above looked like the edge of the world. Volcanic ridges draped in fog, coastlines that seemed to dissolve into the ocean rather than end cleanly. The crew was tired. The instruments hummed. The engines droned. Then one man looked down. Something about the shape was wrong. The landscape of Akutan is flat marsh and scrub grass, broken by nothing. But there, half buried in a bog, tail pointing skyward at an angle that nature does not produce, was a machine. He called it out. The Catalina circled. They could see the rising sun markings on the fuselage. They could see the inverted cockpit pressed into the mud. They could see that whatever this was, it had not burned, had not exploded, had not scattered itself across the hillside. It had simply stopped. The report reached naval intelligence within hours. The language in the initial cables was careful, almost disbelieving. A zero, substantially intact, possibly recoverable. The recovery team arrived by boat. The marsh was exactly as unpleasant as it looked from the air. Cold water, soft ground that shifted underfoot, mud that grabbed and held. They found Tadayoshi Koga still in the cockpit, held in place by his harness, the same harness that had been designed to keep him safe. He was removed, treated with the formality that soldiers extend even to the enemy, and buried on a nearby knoll. Then they turned their full attention to his aircraft. Getting the Zero upright was slow, mechanical work. The forward fuselage had taken the full force of the inversion. The propeller had sheared off on impact. The canopy frame was buckled. But as the recovery team worked carefully around the airframe, the picture became clear. The wings were clean. The tail surfaces were intact. The engine, a Nakajima Sakai 14-cylinder radial, sat behind its cowling in one piece. 36 days in an Alaskan bog, and the aircraft had neither corroded to uselessness nor been spotted by Japanese reconnaissance. Fortune, operating at a level that military planners cannot manufacture. The Zero was lifted, crated in sections, and loaded onto a ship. It traveled south along the coast, through waters that grew progressively warmer, and arrived at Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego. The crates were unloaded with the kind of deliberate care normally reserved for explosives. In a sense, that was accurate. What was inside those crates was more dangerous to the Japanese war effort than a bomb. A bomb destroys what it touches. This had the potential to unravel every tactical assumption the Zero's pilots flew with. The American engineers gathered around the opened crates, and for a long moment, they simply looked. It was smaller than most of them had expected. Elegant, in an almost fragile way. The lines were clean and purposeful. There was nothing wasted, nothing excessive. Every surface served a function. They began to take it apart, not carelessly, methodically, panel by panel, system by system, with cameras documenting each stage and engineers recording dimensions, weights, and materials in notebooks that would eventually become classified technical reports. The aircraft was rebuilt, repaired where necessary, and prepared for something the Japanese high command would have considered inconceivable. The Americans were going to fly it. The first test flights at San Diego happened on September the 20th, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders was assigned to conduct the initial evaluations. He was experienced, precise, the kind of pilot who could separate what a machine was doing from what he was feeling and write it down in language that engineers could use. He flew the Zero more than 20 times. His own report was direct. The very first flight exposed weaknesses of the Zero which our pilots could exploit with proper tactics. What he found over those first flights confirmed the intelligence reports, and then went further. The Zero flew beautifully at low speed. That much was expected. The lightness that made it so dangerous in a slow-turning engagement translated directly into the controls, responsive, balanced, almost telepathic in its reactions. Sanders reported that at cruise speeds, it was among the most pleasant aircraft he had ever flown. Then he pushed it. Above roughly 200 knots, the ailerons began to stiffen. Not dramatically, not all at once, but progressively. As speed increased, the airflow over the wing surfaces loaded the control surfaces with forces that the pilot had to fight with his arms. The Zero became, for practical purposes, reluctant to roll to the right at high speed. Rolling left remained quick. Rolling right became labored. Sanders rolled left, quick, precise, then right. The difference was measurable in seconds. In a dogfight, seconds were the difference between existing and not existing. He wrote it down. The carburetor test was simpler and more dramatic. Sanders pushed the nose down hard, generating negative G-force, the kind a pilot creates when he pushes forward on the stick in a sudden dive. The Nakajima Sakai engine, dependent on gravity-fed fuel flow through its float-type carburetor, stumbled. Then it cut. For several seconds, the most feared engine in the Pacific theater simply quit. It recovered when positive G was restored. But several seconds was an eternity. An American pilot in a Wildcat or a Hellcat, both of which used fuel systems that performed identically under positive or negative G, could push his nose down at full throttle and accelerate away from a Zero in a dive. The Zero's pilot, chasing, would push his own nose down to follow, and his engine would betray him at the worst possible moment. Sanders wrote that down too. The armor situation required no testing. The engineers had documented it during disassembly. There was no pilot armor. There were no self-sealing fuel tanks. A single incendiary round finding the right place would not damage a Zero. It would ignite one. The reports from San Diego circulated through Naval Aviation Command with the speed of something urgently needed. Pilots received them in formal briefings and informal conversations. Squadron commanders annotated their tactical doctrine. The message that emerged was simple enough to memorize and precise enough to execute. Never turn with a Zero at low speed. Never. If one gets on your tail, roll right and dive. Go fast. Go vertical. Use the speed your heavier aircraft can generate and sustain in a descent, speed the lightweight Zero cannot safely match. Force the engagement into the regime where your plane's strengths become decisive. If you have altitude, use it. Convert it to speed. Never give it back. The thatch weave remained valid, refined, not discarded. But now, it had a mechanical complement, a set of physical facts about the enemy aircraft that pilots could exploit with precision. One more piece of information circulated through the Pacific commands during this period. It concerned the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, then completing its development program. The Hellcat had been designed with the Zero problem in mind, but now the Zero itself had informed the solution. Heavier, faster in level flight, with a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine producing 2,000 horsepower. It had pilot armor, it had self-sealing tanks, and it was built to fight at exactly the speeds where the Zero became a different, lesser aircraft. The first Hellcats reached fleet squadrons in early 1943. The pilots who flew them knew things about their opponents that those opponents had never imagined could be known. The Zero that Tadayoshi Koga had flown to Akutan did not survive the war. That is the particular cruelty of this story's final chapter. The aircraft that had crossed the Pacific, participated in the Dutch harbor raid, made its forced landing, spent 36 days in an Alaskan bog, traveled to San Diego, survived disassembly and reassembly, and more than 20 test flight sessions, was destroyed in February of 1945 by an accident on the ground. While the Zero was taxiing at the Naval Air Station North Island, an SB-2C Helldiver, a Curtiss-built dive bomber also in operation at the base, lost control of its aircraft during taxi and its propeller struck the Zero where it sat, chopping it to pieces. The pilot of the Zero escaped. The aircraft did not. No museum holds it. No exhibit presents it under careful lighting with a placard describing what it meant. The physical object is gone. What it gave away, however, was not recoverable. The battle record of the F-6F Hellcat across the Pacific is one of the most lopsided in the history of aerial combat. By the end of the war, Hellcat pilots had claimed approximately 5,163 aerial victories against losses of 270 aircraft in air-to-air combat, a kill ratio of 19-1. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, in June of 1944, almost exactly 2 years after Koga's landing on Akutan, produced what American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. On June the 19th alone, Japanese naval aviation lost over 346 carrier aircraft. Americans lost 23 Hellcats in aerial combat on that day. The Japanese pilots who flew into that engagement were not inferior in courage. Many of them were flying into combat with a fraction of the training hours their predecessors had logged, because the experienced pilots had been ground down across 2 years of attritional warfare. They flew an aircraft whose secrets had been posted, studied, and rehearsed by every man they faced. The Zero, in 1942, had been a revelation. By 1944, it was a known quantity. Koga had done everything correctly. He had flown his mission, taken his damage with discipline, navigated to the designated recovery point, executed his emergency landing by the manual. The ground beneath him was not supposed to be a swamp. The fog was not supposed to hide him from his submarine. The American patrol aircraft was not supposed to fly that particular route on that particular day. None of it was supposed to happen. All of it did. The Zero went into the mud at Akutan nose first on June the 4th, 1942, carrying inside its airframe every secret the Japanese aeronautical program had produced. 36 days later, someone looked down at the right moment, and the war in the Pacific acquired a different shape. There is a version of this story where Koga makes it, where the ground holds, where the wheels roll to a stop across firm earth, where the submarine surfaces in the bay and takes him home, where the Zero stays Japanese, where the weaknesses stay hidden, where the pilots who faced it in 1943 and 44 do so with the same incomplete picture their predecessors carried. That version did not happen. What happened instead was this: one young man, 19 years old, did everything right and ended up in exactly the wrong place. His aircraft outlasted him by nearly 3 years, survived a bog and a disassembly and dozens of test flights, and was ultimately taken by a ground accident so ordinary it has no drama in the telling. A plane lost control during taxi. Its propeller struck a parked aircraft. The parked aircraft happened to be the most valuable piece of enemy hardware in American hands. History does not traffic in fairness. The Zero's legacy is complicated by exactly this. It was, genuinely, a brilliant machine for the war it was designed to fight in 1937. It was less suited to the war it actually found itself in by 1942. The pilots who flew it were, at the peak of Japanese naval aviation, among the best trained in the world. By the end, they were teenagers with months of flight time facing men who had studied their opponents' weaknesses in technical reports. Koga's name does not appear in many history books. The island of Akutan does not appear in most accounts of the Pacific War. The bog that stopped his wheels, and the fog that hid his aircraft, and the patrol that happened to look down, none of it was planned by anyone. It was just what happened, and what happened changed everything.